Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Dave Smith went on Joe Rogan. This isn't unusual, but Dave basically went on there in the context of this Iran shit to go and blab about that for a while. That's pretty much his presence in this so-called comedy podcast space, is that he'll just go and blab specifically about the issue of war, but also other things from a sort of libertarian perspective. So him and Joe pretty much see eye to eye. They go back and forth here a little bit, but they are both pretty much in agreement about the shattering of MAGA, and whatever they thought was supposed to be appealing about Trump has now gone out the window. But what I have been consistently pointing out about this, I think, is the most important aspect of it, and I think is the reason that it's important to pay attention to this particular framing that these guys are going with, is that they are still consistently espousing the cultural argument that comes from the right that basically got us into this situation in the first place. And so that unwillingness to detach from the right-wing cultural argument is what is going to prevent any actual change in this base from occurring. And it's really just puts it up to the people doing the messaging for Trump and Trump himself to figure out what's the right thing to say or the right opportunism to get them on his side again. That's really all he has to do based on what they're saying here. So the first thing I want to play is, this is just a quick contradiction that Joe says on the issue of the border, which is very important. They talk a decent amount about the border here. Not going to get into all of it, but this first part is Joe showing some understanding about the conditions that people live with in Gaza, living under the boot of the Israeli government. That's something that he and Dave agree on, and Dave is very specific in his framing of the power dynamic there in Gaza, and Joe Rogan seems to agree with that. But then you could see the contradiction when it comes to his opinion on America's immigration policy. So check that out.
Like, we were talking about Gaza in particular.
Yeah.
Like the arguing that that's not horrific. And if you're a human being and you recognize that there are human beings that are subjected to that government, just like you're subjected to ICE, you're subjected to Homeland Security, you're subjected to the cops. If you're a civilian, you have to listen to these orders. So if you're living in Gaza and you're a child or you're a woman and you're not Hamas, okay? And the idea that you're responsible for October 7th, even if you're one of the people that cheered in the street, boy, don't you think you kind of have to cheer in the street if everybody else is cheering in the street? If you're fucking in terror for your life and you have to, like, keep your safety intact, like, you got to kind of go along with whatever everybody else is doing. And someone told me that this is a very credible source that I can't reveal what the source is, but they told me that there are people in this country, and not just a few, but many, many, that are affiliated with terrorist organizations, directly affiliated, but they've applied for asylum. And because they've applied for asylum, you can't deport them until they go through the entire process.
Yeah, so he's correct that this idea of assigning the definition of terrorist or terrorism to everybody in a certain society based on even real or loose affiliations with people who are connected with terrorists, people who are connected to groups like Hamas, is not something that you can necessarily judge people for coming from Palestine or a place like that, because it's all that is available there. It is the only type of leadership that has been allowed to flourish in Gaza, and any other secular alternatives to Hamas have been kind of systematically destroyed by the surrounding powers. So that essentially makes it so that the people in Palestine, in many cases, have no choice but to know somebody who is affiliated with what we would call terrorism. But then when it comes to this mysterious anonymous source that Joe Rogan has, which has become an increasing theme, an ever-present aspect of his commentary, is that he will just say things that people have sent to him. And he says that that's his number one way of getting information now, because he's off social media, is people will send him things. People people I trust. People like Brett Weinstein is who he has said in the past. And so this is some mysterious person who told him that there are people who got into America and claimed asylum who we know are connected to terrorist groups. And so you have to go through the entire immigration process. So doesn't reveal who this is, doesn't apply the same logic that he just applied to Palestinians, because this is an issue of American immigration, which he has more of a fear-mongering stance on. And also, does it really make sense that somebody with that information wouldn't be able to speed up the process of immigration or remove somebody? I mean, if ICE is just grabbing people at fruit stands and removing them, you're telling me somebody like that can't be removed? I don't buy that. I don't believe that. So Joe has not built up enough credibility to be giving like on background anonymous sources and just telling us that these sources are credible, especially when his sources that he's listed in the past have been people like Brett Weinstein, and the type of stuff that he's passed along being, oh, kids are using litter boxes in classes. That was a fake, debunked story that Joe Rogan passed along as being something that a teacher friend of his told him, implying that it was something that personally they had seen happen. Turned out it was a fake news story. So that's the kind of stuff that he passes along even before you get to the AI slop that he's into now. So that leads into this next topic here, where they're talking about not only the fracturing of MAGA, but this cultural argument of Democrats. You hear Dave Smith make this argument, he said this before, that the insanity of Democrats and their policy is what made Donald Trump so appealing. So I think that there is some merit to that argument, but the framing that these guys take for granted is exactly why they are very specifically on the right and not on some kind of middle ground. So check that out.
The whole MAGA thing, it's like, we're so fractioned as it is.
Yeah.
Like this whole idea of right versus left as it is, and now you've got a MAGA section of the right.
It's all just ridiculous, dude. But it's a way to describe it as anything other than what it is, which is the most unpopular war in American history going into it. The idea that we would jump into another war of choice for Israel is just too, like, this is too crazy, man. And especially when it's the administration that really ran on and promised that we want to get out of this game of fighting stupid wars in the Middle East.
Yeah, that was what we were all supporting.
Yeah.
That was the one thing that he was saying that was so promising to so many people that were independent, that were on the fence. They're like, this guy wants no wars. All right. He wants closing the border, which I think is a great idea. He wants no wars. That enough. Let's go.
Well, especially considering the fact that, well, like, even if there are some things about Donald Trump that maybe you don't like, it's really hard to kind of overstate how crazy they were, how much of a threat to this country they were. And so for anybody who wants to give shit to anyone who voted for Donald Trump, it's like, hey, man, the alternative was the party who bragged about, first off, insane woke shit, like poisoning the minds of children in a really grotesque and abusive way. They gave us open borders, flooding the country with people. They gave us all types of COVID tyranny based on pseudoscience. They gave us the most reckless foreign policy in American history, which was this proxy war on Russia's border. And they were pretending the president wasn't senile when he clearly was. It does make sense that a lot of people went, okay, we're going to go back with this other guy. And that whole coalition has been destroyed over this war. And now he's going to hand the country right back over to these Democrats who we've been fighting so hard. All for what?
Yeah, so this is where, like I said, these guys are not really changing their mind. And so there's certain aspects of Trump's presidency that they're unhappy with. They feel he's betrayed them on certain issues. But the framing of the past 4 years under Biden is something that they are completely still attached to, not recognizing that framing on certain issues regarding Democrats and the border, but also foreign policy, is what dog walked so many people who aren't Republicans into voting for Republicans. And the perfect example is this weird flip-flop that Dave Smith does, where he says this is a war of aggression. He has said now on the record that Democrats wouldn't be this bad. That as bad as he thinks Democrats are, he doesn't think they would be this bad. But then he says that Democrats were responsible for the most reckless foreign policy in our history, which was supporting Ukraine. He refers to that as a proxy war with Russia, which some people on the left would agree with that framing. I don't necessarily. Calling it reckless is, like I said, it's just a particular framing, because the truth is it would have been more reckless to not do anything and to allow Ukraine to just fall to Russia. That would have been a lot more reckless of a thing to do. But for him to say that that type of warfare and foreign policy is the justification that has now led us to Trump is exactly the type of analysis that led him to making such a huge astronomical mistake in the first place, which by his own standards, he says he has made. And so that's where I think that, there's not much of a coalition here, because there's been a lot of brain rot with these guys when it comes to the issue of COVID, wokeness, immigration. And I think to a certain extent, these are things that need to be engaged with, because there's a lot of people out there that do care about it. But at the same time, the way these guys engage with these issues and the lack of criticism, critical thinking that they apply to these right-leaning narratives is exactly why they were willing to believe Trump in the first place. And so that leads to this last thing that Joe and Dave say, where Joe says that MAGA is this coalition that sounds great, but now is full of a bunch of dorks, which I just think is an interesting pivot. So here's that.
And then the talking point moved to, we need to find our own Joe Rogan. The Democrats need to find a Joe Rogan or
that
whatever.
Was a big
Remember,
one, yeah.
that was like, so they kind of admitted that, the podcasts have become the new mainstream and we are the fringe.
Right, but the dumb part of that statement was, you already had me, you fucking idiots. You just lost your mind. I'm not right and I'm not left.
Yeah.
I think both of them suck. And I think the adherence to the ideologies that the left supports or the right supports is out of their fucking... You gotta be out of your fucking mind. Whether it's these crackpot Christian nationalists that think that this whole war is a way to get Jesus to return on a white horse.
Yeah.
Do you see those guys that were talking? Yeah, during the readiness fucking meeting. I think that's nuts too. I think the woke shit and all the chaos of the fucking last 4 years of having a completely open border and the justifications of all these things, that's nuts too. I'm not on either buddy's side, anyone's side.
But
so
I think
the Democrats aren't ever going to get someone like me, because I'm not with either or.
Yeah,
I'm not with either or. I'm with whoever fucking makes sense, and no one makes sense until AI comes along.
If not supporting covering up the Epstein files or not supporting a stupid war of choice, a war of aggression on behalf of Israel means I'm not MAGA, then okay, I'm not MAGA. I'm not attached to the phrase "Make America Great Again." I don't care. Then
but
fine.
If that phrase sucks. Here's the thing. Like, first of all, America is great. Make America greater, I'm down. But make America great again, and then it becomes a movement of a bunch of fucking dorks, because a lot of them are dorks. A lot of them, these really weird, fucking uninteresting, unintelligent people that have got something they cling to, and there's a lot of people that are just real, genuine patriots, and they're all lumped into this one group, and you got to accept the dorks too. Fuck that. Yeah. Like, the concept of making America great is a great idea, but as soon as you have a fucking team and you allow anybody to join up, you don't even have tryouts for your team. Yeah. So you've got a bunch of fucking dipshits that are running around spouting out opinions, and you have to go along with them because they're MAGA. And then you've got bots online that are probably from fucking Indonesia or Russia or wherever, and they're pretending they're MAGA and they're saying crazy shit. So that's a part of MAGA too. You've fucked up by becoming a part of a group.
Yeah.
Whether it's a Republican group, a Democrat group, a MAGA group, a fucking woke group, whatever it is, you fucked up by being in a group.
Yeah, so this is the comment that's going to get some mileage. I've seen it circulating a little bit, this whole thing about, MAGA is a bunch of dorks, or some of these guys are just lame and uninteresting. So odd to only just now be coming to that conclusion, and also to claim ownership of this movement when those guys were there way before you. They've been there since Charlottesville and all that shit. They were always there as a signal that you should not get on board with this movement. But like I said, it's those cultural arguments that they've attached themselves to, that they've attached their identities to, their brands to, that inclined them to get involved with people like that. People who were in fact making white nationalist arguments or saying things like we need mass deportations. People like Joe Rogan were swallowing wholesale these fake and flimsy justifications for mass deportations, which are now falling apart. The idea that these are masses of criminal people who are causing all kinds of crime, it's complete lies. And it's the reason that even going after innocent people in these communities, they're not able to create the type of mass deportation spectacle that they wanted to create. But even this thing that Joe says about how that's why the Democrats will never get a guy like me, because I don't believe in either of these two sides things, even though he is clearly, even in that statement, you can see that he's on one side of that argument, because Democrats are the ones who are never going to get a guy like him on the basis that he's nonpartisan. So that's odd, because what that means is that nobody under the brand of Democrat could ever convince him that they are more than a Democrat. And I do think in a way that kind of gets to the heart of what is expected of the next wave of progressive politicians, whoever's going to try to win the country back on a presidential level, on a leadership level. They're going to need to transcend what people view as the duopoly of politics. And that is what Trump was able to do. But the idea that they grabbed on because of this one issue of war that Joe says, well, that's the one thing that he said that people could really believe in. No, these people that you're complaining about being in a coalition with, they're the ones who agree with everything. They're the ones who, even if it's not 100% support of Trump, 80%, 70%, yeah, it's probably around there when you're talking about people who consider themselves being part of MAGA. But truly, the point is what Dave Smith said, which is that the coalition of people that Trump was able to put together that fits outside of the sort of conservative norm is still there for somebody else to run on. Probably Tucker Carlson is going to run, it looks like, or he's going to be prominent in politics for a long time. And so better believe that he's taking note of these anti-war sentiments and this general sense of populism, Epstein files, dissatisfaction, that sort of thing that can be capitalized on. The question is, why is it that somebody like Trump, who did the same thing, whatever it is that you're hoping Tucker Carlson or Tulsi Gabbard or whatever the fuck is going to do, Trump already did that. Not only following the same patterns of his first presidency when it comes to these specific conflicts and the rhetoric, which people like to write off when it comes to Trump, but also we are now seeing a complete mask off of the mentality and the personality of Trump. And that is what these guys get away with having normalized and promoted as normal. Like this guy with this temperament, this clear con man thing that he's got going on, where you can tell, and we know because he's been president before, that this is a guy who will say and do anything in order to accrue more power and more wealth. And we're seeing it more blatantly this time than we saw it the last time. And I think there is a reason for that. And I think that it is part of the reason that people's opinion of Trump has taken shape differently this time around. And I've mentioned this before, but I do think that the difference in the media's relationship with Trump this time has allowed a lot of people to come to the same exact conclusions that the media was pointing out about him in the first administration. So there was a lot of panicking and there was a lot of overselling of Trump on every single level, whether it was Russia or just how ridiculous he was, how stupid he was, how this he was, how that he was. And a lot of it was true, but it was so exaggerated and in people's faces that they viewed it as propaganda. Whereas now people are coming back around to the same exact conclusions. Trump is a madman. Trump is only doing this to enrich himself. He must be blackmailed or compromised. You know, I mean, this is the same exact shit that has been known about Trump for a long time, albeit, you know, it wasn't exactly the framing that Israel was doing it before. So I think when it comes to these things like COVID and science and just the general sense of truth about what did or didn't happen in the country, what is or isn't the result of policy. One thing that Dave Smith says here is that there's nobody in the country that would support open borders, and they never ask that question in the poll. What they ask is, would you support a more secure border or a less secure border? The reason is because that is the more accurate way to frame the policy. This thing about open borders is something that the right has embraced wholesale. That was never a policy of the Biden administration. So you can argue that their immigration policy was too lax, but that isn't as helpful framing for the right as saying open borders, which is something that Joe Rogan has been saying on his platform for a long time now. So I think the only way to get back to some kind of consensus is to probably allow some breathing room, because what these guys are going to do is break off into their own universe and probably continue going further with the anti-vax stuff, and that's going to cause real problems and ripple effects in the population. But ultimately, people are going to come back to the same conclusions if they feel like they are coming to those conclusions on their own. And if that means the media or the general apparatus of like asserting authority when it comes to things like science, people who have actually done the work, if that means that there has to be a little bit less insistence and yet a steadfast and consistent approach to putting the right information out there, that might ultimately loop around to more people being interested in better information. At least that's about the best I can hope for. But even still, all these years later, we don't hear nothing about it. But Trump has implied that the Iranian leaders have tried to kill him multiple times and didn't succeed in it. And it seems like he was hinting at something that had happened.